First, tell us your predictions for next year, what you are watching for in the industry, and how 2022 could possibly top what we saw this past year.
2022 looks like it can be a very exciting year in terms of space exploration. There are a number of things that are planned to happen. First of all, NASA has planned several test flights of new crew capsules. They plan to test first of all, their heavy lift launch vehicle, the SLS rocket that is part of the Artemis 1 mission that will return astronauts to the moon. So they're going to do an uncrewed flight of their Orion crew capsule around the moon in either March or April. That sounds pretty exciting if that can happen. So this is going to test both the capsule and test the launch vehicle as well. This is the first rocket that NASA has newly built since the space shuttle program, actually. So this is going to be an exciting launch. So there's one thing that's going to happen. Boeing is going to test its new crew capsule, the CST-100 Starliner. They're going to do first an uncrewed test and then a crewed test later next year. Virgin Galactic, it has to begin getting things ready for flights for regular ticket holders at some point next year. And of course, if we look over in the commercial side of things, we know that Blue Origin has to begin fulfillment of contracts for launch services sometime next year. You know, they've been doing the tourist thing last year, which was exciting enough, but they need to start making money. So they have to start fulfilling some of those contracts. They're also going to implement a new heavy lift launch vehicle they call New Glenn. And, you know, the number of things that happen from there keep going on and on and on. Oh, SpaceX, by the way, is going to do its first orbital test of its gigantic Starship. And this is the rocket craft that is supposed to be able to take far more payload than any other rockets have done so in the past. And this is what's going to open the gates for NASA to actually get the Artemis program on the moon started, because this will be the landing system that will be used to take astronauts and payload down to the surface.
Well, it's not just any payload that SpaceX is going to keep bringing up to space. It is expected to bring up to 30,000 internet beaming satellites into low Earth orbit, but it's had a couple close calls. The Chinese referred SpaceX in a complaint to the United Nations after a close call where Chinese astronauts in one of their space stations had to essentially dive out of the way by a couple hundred meters to miss an incoming satellite. I'm wondering what you make of the traffic jam up in space and whether you could see any regulation from the UN or other governing bodies in the next year.
The space junk problem has been increasing ever since we first had access to space back in the late 1950s, early 1960s. But the proliferation of satellites like those that are being used in the program by SpaceX to provide low-cost, high-quality internet access around the world really is going to challenge our ability to figure out what we need to keep in space, what we need to deorbit from space, so that we don't run into an issue where satellites are crashing into each other. That's going to create an enormous problem if that begins to happen. Now, so far, SpaceX has been working with our Space Command network to make sure that none of these collisions actually happen, but there have been these close calls. Will there be any regulation next year? Well, SpaceX is working with every agency and every sort of interconnection point to try to figure out how they can manage to keep things straight. And so far, fingers crossed, and that's no way to do science, but so far, nothing bad has happened. However, there's still a possibility that there could be a collision that would create even more pieces of junk that would then simply become, flying bullets that could impact other spacecraft. We really don't want that scenario to develop.